I called an HVAC technician because my air conditioner was making a strange noise. 20 minutes later, he sent me a text. "Ma'am, there's a locked room behind your basement shelves." I thought he had the wrong house. I'd lived there for more than 20 years. There was no secret room. Then he called me. His voice was shaking. "Ma'am, you need to come downstairs. I can hear someone breathing inside." A few minutes later, the police arrived. They cut through 4 heavy padlocks and opened a hidden door I never knew existed. What they found inside turned me into the prime suspect. Before I tell you what happened, do me a quick favor. Take a quick second to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from today. I always enjoy seeing how many different cities, states, and countries these stories reach. My name is Marilyn Carter. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside Springfield, Missouri. For most of my life, I've been an ordinary woman. I spent 28 years teaching elementary school. I raised 2 children. I volunteered at the animal shelter. I baked casseroles for community fundraisers and spent countless afternoons tending flowers that never seemed to grow where I planted them. Nothing remarkable. Nothing dramatic. And until 3 weeks ago, I would have told you I was one of the luckiest women in America. Funny how quickly life can prove you wrong. Now let me tell you about my husband. His name was Russell Carter. 71 years old. Retired construction contractor. The kind of guy who believed every problem in the world could be solved with enough duct tape and confidence. We'd been married 22 years. Together 25. He loved old Western movies, black coffee, and pretending he wasn't sentimental. Every Valentine's Day he'd complain that the holiday was a racket. Then he'd show up carrying flowers anyway. That's the man I thought I knew. The man I trusted. The man who sat across from me every evening and asked how my day had been. Turns out you can spend decades beside someone and still not know who they really are. The nightmare started on a Thursday in late April. Russell had left 2 days earlier for a fishing trip near Lake Washita in Arkansas with an old buddy. At least that's what he told me. I had the house to myself. Honestly, I was enjoying it. No westerns playing at full volume. No muddy boots by the back door. No debates about the thermostat. Just me, a mystery novel, and some peace and quiet. Then the air conditioner started making noise. Not a normal noise. Not the usual hum or rattle. This sound was different. Sharp. Metallic. Almost rhythmic. Like somebody tapping a wrench against a pipe every few seconds. First I ignored it. Then it got louder. By noon, it sounded like the machine was trying to get my attention. I figured I'd better get it checked before Missouri summer turned my house into an oven. So I called a repair company. A technician named Ethan arrived about an hour later. Nice young fellow. Couldn't have been older than 30. Polite. Professional. The kind of young man who still says yes ma'am and actually means it. He headed downstairs to inspect the system while I stayed upstairs making a pitcher of iced tea. 20 minutes passed. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. From Ethan. "Mrs. Carter, are you home?" I frowned. Of course I was home. He was literally in my basement. I typed back. "Yes." "Why?" 3 little dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally another message arrived. "Ma'am, there's a locked room down here." My stomach tightened. Locked room? That made no sense. I had spent more than 2 decades in that house. There wasn't supposed to be any locked room. I typed back. "What are you talking about?" A few seconds later my phone rang. I answered. Ethan sounded nervous. "Mrs. Carter, I think you need to come downstairs. Right now." Something in his voice made the hair on my arms stand up. I headed for the basement. Fast. When I reached the bottom step, Ethan was standing near the back wall behind several old storage shelves. The same shelves Russell always insisted we keep. I'd suggested donating them more times than I could count. Every single time he'd said no. Now they had been pulled a few inches away from the wall. And behind them was a door. A door I had never seen before. My heart nearly stopped. The door had been painted the exact same color as the basement wall. Same trim. Same finish. If the shelves were pushed against it, you'd never know it existed. Not in a million years. What the heck? I whispered. Ethan pointed. 4 heavy padlocks secured the door. 4. Not 1. Not 2. 4. Then I heard it. A sound coming from inside. Slow. Steady. Breathing. Every muscle in my body froze. For a moment I genuinely believed somebody was trapped in there. Did you call the police? I asked. Ethan nodded. They're already on the way. I stared at that hidden door and felt something I'd never felt before. Not ordinary fear. Not the kind you feel watching a scary movie. This was different. This was the feeling that your entire life had just shifted without warning. The police arrived 7 minutes later. 2 officers and a detective. They asked me a few questions while another officer examined the locks. I kept calling Russell. No answer. Straight to voicemail every time. The detective looked at me carefully. You've never seen this room before? No. And you've lived here for 22 years? Yes. He looked surprised. Truthfully, so was I. The officers cut through the final padlock. The detective wrapped his hand around the knob. The entire basement seemed to fall silent. Then he opened the door. The room was empty. Completely empty. Concrete floor. Bare walls. 1 exposed light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Nothing else. Almost nothing. In the far corner sat a small portable speaker. Beside it was a prepaid cell phone. The detective picked up the phone. The speaker was still powered on. That's when we realized what we'd been hearing. The breathing wasn't real. It was a recording. A loop. Someone had triggered it remotely. Someone wanted that sound to be heard. Someone wanted the police called. Someone wanted that door opened. The detective slowly turned toward me. And for the first time all day, I saw suspicion in his eyes. Not concern. Not sympathy. Suspicion. Then another officer called out. Detective, you've got to see this. The officer was kneeling beside a loose section of flooring. He reached underneath and pulled out a small envelope. The detective opened it. Inside was a photograph. His expression changed immediately. Mrs. Carter, he said quietly. Do you know a woman named Vanessa Reed? I shook my head. No. He slid the photograph toward me. My blood ran cold. Written across the back of the picture, in handwriting that looked exactly like mine, were 4 chilling words. She knows too much. And that was the moment I realized somebody wasn't just hiding secrets in my house. Somebody was building a case against me. And deep down, a thought entered my mind that I wasn't ready to admit. Not yet. Because if that thought was true, then the person behind all of this wasn't a stranger. It was someone who knew my house. Someone who knew my routines. Someone who knew my handwriting. Someone who had spent years earning my trust. And there was only one person who fit that description. My husband. But at that moment, I still wasn't ready to believe it. The police remained at my house for almost 2 hours after finding the photograph. During that time, they treated the hidden room like a full crime scene. They photographed every inch of it. The walls. The floor. The door. The shelves that had concealed it all those years. Before leaving, they collected the prepaid cell phone, the portable speaker, the envelope, and the photograph of Vanessa Reed. One officer carefully placed each item into evidence bags. Another dusted parts of the room for fingerprints. Detective Nolan Pierce supervised everything. He didn't say much. But every now and then I caught him looking at me. Not with sympathy. Not with reassurance. With curiosity. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle. And I wasn't sure whether I was part of the solution or part of the problem. Before leaving, he handed me his business card. If your husband contacts you, call me immediately. I nodded. Then he added something that stuck with me. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone else. After that, they left. The house felt strangely empty. The hidden room remained open in the basement. The sight of it made my skin crawl. For 22 years, I'd been living only a few feet away from that room, and I had never known it existed. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph. I saw the detective's expression. I saw those 4 words written in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. She knows too much. Around midnight, I tried calling Russell again. Straight to voicemail. I called a second time. Nothing. A third. Nothing. By morning, I had stopped leaving messages. The silence was starting to scare me. Russell wasn't the type to disappear. Stubborn? Absolutely. Forgetful? Sometimes. But completely unreachable for days? Never. The next morning, my doorbell rang just after 9. When I opened the door, Detective Pierce was standing there. His expression immediately told me something had changed. "Mrs. Carter, may I come in?" I stepped aside. A few minutes later, we were sitting at my kitchen table. He opened a folder. Inside was the photograph from the basement. Vanessa Reed. The smiling woman whose face was now burned into my memory. The detective folded his hands. "Mrs. Carter, we've identified her." My stomach tightened. He continued. "Vanessa Reed, 34 years old, from Tulsa, Oklahoma." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said the words I had been dreading. "She was officially reported missing 19 days ago." I felt my chest tighten. Missing. Not dead. Not found. Missing. The detective explained that Vanessa had left her apartment one evening and never returned. Her car had been located days later. But Vanessa herself was nowhere to be found. No confirmed sightings. No phone activity. Nothing. Just a woman who seemed to have vanished. I looked down at the photograph. Suddenly it felt much heavier than a piece of paper. This wasn't some random picture hidden in a secret room. This was evidence connected to a missing person. And it had been found in my basement. Detective Pierce watched me carefully. "Are you absolutely certain you've never met Vanessa Reed?" "Yes." "Never spoken with her?" "No." "Never heard Russell mention her?" "No." The detective wrote something in his notebook. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit, because every answer I gave seemed to create more questions. Then he asked something unexpected. "Who normally has access to the basement?" "The two of us." "You and Russell?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. Again he wrote something down. And this time I couldn't ignore the feeling growing in my stomach. The questions weren't aimed at Russell anymore. They were aimed at me. The detective stayed another 20 minutes. When he finally stood up to leave, he paused near the front door. "Mrs. Carter." "Yes." "If you remember anything unusual over the past few months, call me immediately." I nodded. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, thinking. For the first time since this nightmare began, I started seeing the situation through the detective's eyes. A hidden room. A missing woman's photograph. A message written in my handwriting. And a house that belonged to me. No kidding, folks. If I were the detective, I'd probably have questions too. Then my cell phone buzzed. My heart jumped. I grabbed it immediately, hoping it was Russell, praying it was Russell. But it wasn't. Instead, it was a voicemail notification. A voicemail that had somehow arrived hours late. The sender's number was blocked. I pressed play. The message lasted less than 5 seconds. A distorted voice whispered only one sentence. "Tell the police the truth, Marilyn." Then the recording ended. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, because whoever left that message seemed to believe one thing. That I already knew exactly what happened to Vanessa Reed. I must have listened to that voicemail 20 times. "Tell the police the truth, Marilyn." That was it. 5 words. No explanation. No name. No clue who had sent it. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone, trying to make sense of something that made absolutely no sense. What truth? That was the question that kept bothering me. Because as far as I knew, I had already told the police everything. I didn't know Vanessa Reed. I didn't know anything about a secret room. And I certainly didn't know why somebody was trying to connect me to a missing woman. So what truth was I supposedly hiding? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Then another possibility occurred to me. Maybe the message wasn't accusing me of lying. Maybe somebody believed I knew something without realizing I knew it. A forgotten conversation. Something Russell had mentioned. Something I had ignored. Something that hadn't seemed important at the time. I replayed the voicemail again and again, listening for background noise. A familiar voice. Anything. But there was nothing. The voice sounded distorted, artificial, almost mechanical. Whoever sent it didn't want to be identified. That much was obvious. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to sleep. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat alone in the dark kitchen, thinking. Every road seemed to lead back to the same person. Russell. The missing woman. The hidden room. The unanswered phone calls. The timing of his fishing trip. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. And that's when I made a decision. If the answers weren't coming to me, I was going to start looking for them myself. The next morning, I walked into Russell's home office. For years, I rarely spent time in there. Not because he forbade it. He simply liked having his own space. His desk. His paperwork. His projects. His clutter. The room looked normal enough. Bookshelves lined one wall. A filing cabinet stood in the corner. His desk was covered with stacks of papers and old magazines. At first, nothing seemed unusual. I searched through drawers. Old receipts. Instruction manuals. Tax records. Business documents from years ago. Nothing connected to Vanessa Reed. Nothing connected to a hidden room. Nothing connected to anything. Then I noticed a small metal lockbox sitting on the bottom shelf of a cabinet. I frowned. I'd never seen it before. Surprisingly, it wasn't locked. That alone felt strange. Russell locked everything. His truck. His tool chest. Even the backyard shed. Yet this box was sitting there wide open. I carried it to the dining room table and opened it. Inside were dozens of documents. Most appeared to be bank statements. At first I didn't understand why he had hidden them. Then I started reading. My stomach slowly tightened. Transfer after transfer appeared throughout the records. $300. $500. $675. Small amounts. Spread out over years. Never large enough to draw attention. Never large enough to trigger concern. The kind of transactions most people would never notice. Especially when they trusted the person handling the finances. I grabbed a calculator. Then a notepad. The numbers kept growing. 30,000. 37,000. 44,000. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. More than $51,000 had quietly disappeared from our accounts over 6 years. No kidding, folks. I checked the total 3 times. The number never changed. $51,000. Gone. And every transfer led to accounts I didn't recognize. I sat back in my chair, trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe an investment. Maybe a retirement fund. Maybe something Russell had forgotten to mention. Then another document slipped from the stack. A property record. Picked it up. The address meant nothing to me. A small property outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. I had never heard of it. Never visited it. Never discussed it with Russell. Yet his name appeared clearly on the paperwork. Russell Carter. Property owner. A chill ran through me. Because Tulsa was the same city Detective Pierce had mentioned. The city where Vanessa Reed lived before she disappeared. For the first time, coincidence stopped feeling like coincidence. My phone suddenly rang. I nearly jumped. The screen showed Detective Pierce. I answered immediately. Mrs. Carter. His voice sounded serious. We've completed a preliminary review of the phone recovered from your basement. My stomach tightened. What did you find? We recovered several deleted files. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of files? A series of photographs. The room suddenly felt smaller. Photographs of Vanessa Reed? Yes. My heart started pounding. Then the detective added something that made it worse. One of the photographs appears to have been taken inside your home. I couldn't speak. For a moment I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. What? The image shows a woman matching Vanessa Reed standing in what appears to be your basement. My legs felt weak. Vanessa had somehow been inside my house. Inside my basement. And I had absolutely no memory of ever seeing her. After ending the call I sat motionless, trying to process everything. Then my eyes drifted back toward the lockbox. Toward the remaining documents I hadn't finished examining. Something inside me already knew what I was going to find. I just didn't know how bad it would be. As I reached for another folder, a glossy photograph slid free and landed face up on the table. The moment I saw it, my blood turned to ice. Because staring back at me was Vanessa Reed. The same woman from the basement photograph. The same missing woman. Only this picture was different. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a man wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. Most of his face was hidden, but I recognized the silver watch immediately. I had bought it for Russell on our 20th wedding anniversary. I knew that watch better than I knew my own jewelry. The man in the photograph was my husband, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped wondering whether Russell was involved, and started wondering how long he had been lying to me. For a long time I sat staring at that photograph. Vanessa Reed, Russell, standing together like they knew each other. Like strangers don't. Like people who shared a history. My first instinct was to call Detective Pierce. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was confusion. Or maybe it was the growing realization that every piece of evidence somehow seemed to circle back toward me. The hidden room was in my house. The message was written in handwriting that looked like mine. Vanessa had apparently been photographed inside my basement. And now I was the one finding evidence. No kidding, folks. I was starting to worry that if I handed over every clue the moment I found it, Detective Pierce might start asking why I kept discovering all these things. Instead, I called someone I trusted. My younger brother, Daniel. Daniel lived about 40 minutes away, and had spent 30 years working as an insurance investigator before retiring. If anyone knew how to spot something suspicious, it was him. When I explained everything, there was a long silence. Finally, he said 3 words. "I'm coming over." An hour later, we were sitting at my dining room table. Photographs, bank records, property documents. Everything was spread out in front of us. Daniel spent nearly 20 minutes studying the paperwork without speaking. Then he leaned back. This wasn't random. I felt my stomach tighten. What do you mean? These transfers. He tapped the bank statements. They weren't rushed. They were planned. He pointed to several transactions. They were intentionally kept small enough to avoid attention. The way he said it made me uneasy, because deep down I already knew he was right. Then he picked up the property records from Oklahoma. You said Russell never mentioned owning this place? Never. Daniel nodded slowly. That's a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that suggests your husband has been living a second life. Those words hit harder than I expected. A second life. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend Russell. But every piece of evidence sitting on that table made it harder. Before leaving, Daniel gave me a piece of advice. Don't tell Russell what you found. I looked at him. You think he'll come back? I think eventually he has to. That night I barely slept. The following afternoon, Detective Pierce called. His voice sounded different. More formal. More cautious. Mrs. Carter, I'd like you to come to the station tomorrow morning. My stomach dropped. Why? We have some additional questions. Questions. That word again. Questions usually meant they still didn't have answers. And when investigators don't have answers, they start looking harder at the people closest to the case. The next morning, I sat across from Detective Pierce in a small interview room. The atmosphere felt completely different from our earlier conversations. This wasn't a friendly chat. This felt official. He asked about Vanessa, the hidden room, my marriage, my daily routines. Then he placed a folder on the table. Inside were enlarged photographs from the basement phone. My blood ran cold. One image showed Vanessa standing near the hidden room door. Another showed her sitting in a chair. And in the corner of one photograph, you could see part of a floral blanket. A blanket I recognized immediately, because it had belonged to me. I stared at it, speechless. Detective Pierce noticed. "You recognize something?" I swallowed hard. "The blanket." He wrote something down. That simple reaction suddenly made me nervous. Every answer seemed to create another question. By the time I left the station, I could feel the investigation shifting. Detective Pierce wasn't accusing me. Not yet. But he wasn't ruling me out either. And that scared me. A lot. When I arrived home later that afternoon, a pickup truck was sitting in my driveway. For a moment I thought it belonged to a neighbor. Then I recognized it. Russell's truck. I froze. My heart started pounding. Because after days of silence, after unanswered calls, after voicemails, after a missing woman, after hidden rooms and secret photographs, Russell was home. He stepped out of the truck carrying a duffel bag, looking completely normal, like he'd just returned from an ordinary fishing trip. I couldn't believe it. "Marilyn." His voice sounded calm. Too calm. I stared at him. "Where have you been?" He shrugged. "No signal at the lake." No signal. That was his explanation. Days of silence. No signal. I almost laughed. Instead, I watched him carefully, waiting for some sign. Any sign. But Russell acted exactly like the man I'd been married to for 22 years. Relaxed. Comfortable. Unbothered. And somehow that frightened me more than panic would have. That evening, after he went to bed, I returned to his office. I wasn't looking for money anymore. I wasn't looking for photographs. I was looking for answers. That's when I discovered a second lockbox hidden behind a row of books. This one was locked, but the key was taped underneath the desk, almost like someone wanted it to be found. Inside were dozens of documents, handwriting samples, practice sheets, pages covered with the same words written over and over again. Picked one up, and my blood turned to ice, because every page contained attempts to copy my handwriting, my letters, my signature, my style, line after line, page after page, for years. Then I found something even worse. A folder labeled simply, "Marilyn." My hands trembled as I opened it. And in that moment I realized something horrifying. The evidence against me wasn't being created recently. It had been created for years. And somebody had been preparing it long before Vanessa Reed ever disappeared. The question was, why? I didn't confront Russell that night. After finding the second lockbox, I carefully put everything back exactly where I'd found it. The documents, the handwriting samples, the photograph, everything. Then I went to bed and pretended nothing had happened. The next morning, Russell left the house before sunrise. He said he was meeting an old fishing buddy for breakfast. I watched his truck disappear down the street. The moment it was gone, I picked up my phone and called Daniel. An hour later, he was sitting at my dining room table reviewing every piece of evidence. The property records, the missing money, the photograph of Vanessa, the handwriting practice sheets, the folder labeled Marilyn. For nearly 30 minutes, Daniel didn't say a word. Then he slowly removed his glasses. "Marilyn, you need to call Detective Pierce." I already knew that. I just needed somebody else to say it. 2 hours later, Detective Pierce arrived. I handed him everything. First he said nothing. He carefully reviewed every page, every photograph, every document. Then he stopped at one of the handwriting sheets. His expression changed. He looked up at me, then at Daniel, then back at me. Finally he spoke. "Mrs. Carter." His voice sounded different, almost uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He placed the document on the table. "I don't believe you created this evidence." My chest tightened. For days I had felt like I was drowning under suspicion. Now for the first time I felt air returning to my lungs. The detective continued. "I think somebody created it against you." Daniel leaned back in his chair. Neither of us spoke. The detective gathered the documents. Then he said something that surprised me. "We're close. But we're not close enough." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means I think Russell built this case against you." My stomach twisted. "But I still need proof." That was when the plan was born. For the next 2 days, investigators quietly prepared. Detective Pierce explained exactly how it would work. I wouldn't accuse Russell of anything directly. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't threaten him. My job was simply to start a conversation. The detective gave me a small recording device hidden inside a pendant necklace. It looked completely ordinary, something a grandmother might wear every day. The microphone inside was powerful enough to capture every word spoken in the room. At the same time, investigators obtained the necessary warrants and set up surveillance. On the night of the operation, an unmarked police vehicle was parked several houses away. Detective Pierce and 2 investigators were inside wearing headphones. They would be listening live. If Russell made incriminating statements, they would move immediately. No kidding, folks. The whole thing felt like something from a crime show. Except this was my life. And I was terrified. 2 evenings later, Russell was sitting across from me in the living room watching television, acting like nothing had happened, acting like our lives weren't hanging by a thread. I took a slow breath, touched the pendant around my neck, and began. "Russell, who's Vanessa Reed?" His eyes stayed on the television. "Never heard of her." I nodded calmly. Then I reached into a folder beside me and slid the photograph across the coffee table. The one showing him standing beside Vanessa. The moment he saw it, he froze. Not for long, but long enough. Long enough for me to know I wasn't imagining things. He slowly picked up the photograph. "Where did you get this?" I leaned back. "That's the wrong question." His jaw tightened. "Marilyn, the right question is why you lied." For several seconds neither of us spoke. He stared at me, trying to figure out how much I knew, trying to figure out what I'd discovered. I let him wonder. Then I pointed at the photograph. "Let's try again." "Who is she?" "A client." "Try again." "A business contact." "Try again." His face hardened. "You've been going through my things." I shrugged. "You've been hiding things." Then something changed. For the first time his calm mask started slipping. His voice became sharper, more defensive. "You should have left it alone." I looked directly at him. "Left what alone?" He immediately realized his mistake. But it was too late. I saw it in his eyes. And somewhere down the street Detective Pierce heard it too. Russell stood up, started pacing, running his hands through his hair. Then came the sentence that ended everything. "You weren't supposed to find any of this." The moment those words left his mouth, I knew investigators had what they needed. A few seconds later my phone vibrated once. A prearranged signal from Detective Pierce. They had heard enough. Then came a knock at the front door. Not officers bursting inside. Not some dramatic raid. Just a knock. Russell looked toward the door, confused. A second knock followed. I stood up and opened it. Detective Pierce was standing there. 3 officers stood beside him. The moment Russell saw them, all the color drained from his face. The detective stepped inside holding an arrest warrant. "Russell Carter, you're under arrest." The room fell silent. Russell looked at me. then at the photograph, then at the detective, and finally at the pendant around my neck. That's when he understood. The conversation had never been private. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked afraid. The officers moved forward. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. As they led him toward the door, I finally spoke. "Why, Russell?" He stopped walking. For a moment I thought he might answer. But he didn't. He simply lowered his head and walked outside. 3 days later, Detective Pierce returned. Daniel was there too. The three of us sat around my kitchen table. This time the detective carried a thick case file. The investigation had moved fast. Search warrants had been executed. Phones had been examined. Financial records had been recovered. And Russell had finally started talking. The detective opened the file. "Mrs. Carter, I think you deserve answers." I nodded. I wasn't sure I was ready for them, but I nodded anyway. The first answer shocked me. The voicemail. The detective looked directly at me. The person who sent the message was Vanessa Reed. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. What? She's alive. For a moment I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. Alive. After everything that had happened. After all the fear. All the questions. Vanessa Reed was alive. The detective explained that after discovering Russell's plan, Vanessa became terrified. She learned he intended to use her disappearance as part of a larger scheme, one that would eventually point investigators toward me. She disappeared before he could use her, changed identities, stayed hidden. But before disappearing completely, she anonymously sent the voicemail. The detective repeated the message. "Tell the police the truth, Marilyn." Suddenly it all made sense. She wasn't accusing me. She was warning me. Then came another answer. Russell had no idea the hidden room had been discovered. The HVAC technician finding it was completely accidental. The detective explained that Russell never expected anyone to uncover the room. Not then. Not ever. Which explained something else. Why he came home. Russell believed everything was still under control. He thought the evidence against me had already been planted. He thought Vanessa was gone. He thought nobody knew about the room. Running would have made him look guilty. Coming home made him look innocent. At least that had been the plan. Then Detective Pierce revealed the worst part. The handwriting. The years of practice. The forged notes. The fake evidence. It hadn't started with Vanessa. Not even close. 4 years Russell had been creating what the detective called a contingency plan. A backup plan. A scapegoat. Someone he could blame if his financial crimes were ever exposed. That person was me. Because I trusted him. Because nobody would believe he'd do something like that to his wife. Then came the motive. The part that finally explained everything. Years earlier, Russell had lost a large portion of his retirement savings through risky investments. Instead of admitting it, he started stealing money from our joint accounts. Then came the hidden property in Oklahoma, the secret relationship with Vanessa, the hidden transactions, the fraud. The lies kept growing, and eventually the truth became too dangerous. When Vanessa started threatening to expose everything, Russell decided somebody else needed to take the fall. Me. The room fell silent. Then I asked a question that had been bothering me from the very beginning. Did Russell ever tell you when he built the room? Detective Pierce nodded. He did. When? About 4 years ago, while you were away on a month-long vacation with friends. I stared at him. The detective continued. Russell admitted he used that time to build the room and hide the entrance behind the storage shelves before you returned home. 4 years. The room had been there for 4 years. And I never knew it existed. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me for days. Did he say why? Detective Pierce nodded slowly. He did. I swallowed hard. Why me? The detective looked down at his notes, then read Russell's answer. Because she trusted me. Those 4 words hurt more than everything else. More than the money. More than the lies. More than the investigation. 22 years together. And that was the reason. Trust. Before leaving, Detective Pierce gave me one final update. Vanessa Reed had agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. That cooperation had helped confirm many of the details investigators were uncovering. The detective closed his file. Then he stood up from the table and headed for the door. For a long time after he left, I simply sat there in silence, trying to process everything I had learned. A few days later, the news became official. Russell had confessed to major portions of the scheme after investigators confronted him with the recordings, financial records, property documents, and Vanessa's testimony. The charges included fraud, conspiracy, evidence tampering, identity theft, theft of marital assets, and obstruction of justice. Several months later, a federal judge approved the plea agreement. Russell was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. At his age, it was effectively the rest of his life. As for Vanessa, prosecutors determined that while she had helped Russell conceal certain financial transactions, she had eventually come forward voluntarily and provided critical evidence that helped expose the entire scheme. Because of her cooperation, she was treated as a cooperating witness rather than the primary offender. She still faced legal consequences for her role in the financial misconduct. But unlike Russell, she avoided prison and received a much lighter penalty as part of an agreement with prosecutors. When I heard the final outcome, I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just sat quietly in my kitchen, staring out the window, thinking about 22 years of marriage, thinking about how one person's greed had destroyed everything, and thinking about how close I came to losing my freedom for something I never did. The hidden room was eventually demolished. The wall was rebuilt. The secret was erased. But some things can't be rebuilt so easily. Sometimes people ask what hurt most. The money? The lies? The betrayal? The answer is none of those. What hurt most was realizing that the person I trusted most in the world had spent years preparing for the day he'd need to sacrifice me. Not protect me. Not stand beside me. Sacrifice me. But in the end, his plan failed. The truth survived. And so did I. But trust should never replace awareness. Pay attention to the things that don't make sense. The questions that never get answered. The instincts that refuse to go away. Because sometimes the smallest warning signs become the biggest truths. And sometimes, the truth only needs one chance. If this story touched your heart or gave you something to think about, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories and life lessons to you every week. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.